Introduction of the Use of Knowledge in Society. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Stacy M. The Use of Knowledge in Society by Friedrich Hayek. Introduction. Few scholars in the 20th century have equaled the breadth of F.A. Hayek's interests in the human sciences. His many books and articles focus on the pivotal questions of theory and method in a variety of disciplines, ranging from philosophy and natural science to history, law, psychology, and economics. In spite of the malignant totalitarianism of the times, he has steadfastly advanced the traditional concern for individual liberty, which he inherited from his classical liberal predecessors, and has become an intellectual leader of international stature. Born in Vienna in 1899, Hayek earned doctoral degrees in law and economics at the University of Vienna following his military service during the First World War. Over the years, he has lectured widely throughout the world and pursued an active career of teaching and research in Austria, England, the United States, Germany, and Japan. He is professor emeritus of 2 universities, Chicago and Freiburg, and now lives in Salzburg, where he continues to teach and write. Perhaps the most important measure of a classic is that it speaks for all times. Its insight is timeless. Its relevance never ceases. What the author says illuminates the past, informs the present, and, we may hope, guides men toward wiser actions than they have taken before. This essay by Professor Hayek meets these criteria, both in the philosophical nature of his discourse and in the subject itself, man's striving to improve his material well-being. This is the problem of achieving rational economic organization, or the efficient allocation of available resources. Its solution, Hayek maintains, rests on the extent to which men can effectively acquire knowledge and use it economically, so that they can make rapid adaptations to the changes they keep facing in their circumstances. The method most commonly employed throughout recorded history has been conscious control, some form of centralized political planning based on an avowed or implicit belief in Superman. Unfortunately, this approach causes a static, rather than dynamic, response to man's struggle with his environment, and produces reactionary policies and even retrogressive results. Without belaboring the dismal record of those efforts, Hayek finds the key to success in a far different instrumentality, namely the free market, which he sees as performing the functions that are indispensable for the effective acquisition and economical use of knowledge. The market fully and accurately reflects personal preferences and particular facts known only to each individual, and, through the mechanism of the price system, provides for the transmission and reception of only that portion of this infinite knowledge which is useful and necessary to achieve rational economy. No other arrangement can bring about this desired end. It is ironic that the free market, whose remarkable characteristics Hayek so clearly delineates in this essay, has been under constant attack by the major political antagonists of modern times. On the one hand, the entrenched leadership in every nation has rejected the price system by repeatedly instituting restrictive controls. On the other, various groups revolting against this leadership have repudiated economic freedom by confusing these dirigist regimes with the free market economy, which they denounce for its supposedly enslaving wage price system and dehumanizing division of labor. In contrast to the obvious coercion and violence generated by these adversaries, Hayek points the way toward a truly rational economic order, which recognizes the necessity of individual choice or subjective value, and facilitates peaceful decision-making through the objective functioning of the price system in a free market. He demonstrates the superiority of what might be called social individualism over political collectivism as the operative principle for a free and orderly society. Perhaps contemporary revolutionaries may yet discover laissez-faire as the secret to real reform. While national leaders may see it as the elusive answer to the economic disorders which their own actions have intensified rather than cured. In any event, this essay should prove helpful to those who are genuinely concerned about these problems. Kenneth S. Templeton, Jr., Institute for Humane Studies. End of introduction.
Section 2 of the Use of Knowledge in Society. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Mary T. The Use of Knowledge in Society by Friedrich Hayek. The use of knowledge in society. Many of the current disputes with regard to both economic theory and economic policy have their common origin, it seems to me, in a misconception about the nature of the economic problem of society. This misconception, in turn, is due to an erroneous transfer to social phenomena of the habits of thought we have developed in dealing with the phenomena of nature. What is the problem we wish to solve when we try to construct a rational economic order? On certain familiar assumptions, the answer is simple enough. If we possess all the relevant information, if we can start out from a given system of preferences, and if we command complete knowledge of available means, the problem which remains is purely one of logic. That is, the answer to the question of what is the best use of the available means is implicit in our assumptions. Stated briefly in mathematical form, it is that the marginal rates of substitution between any two commodities or factors must be the same in all their different uses. This, however, is emphatically not the economic problem which society faces, and the economic calculus which we have developed to solve it, though an important step toward the solution of the economic problem of society, does not yet provide an answer to it. The reason for this is that the data for the whole society from which the economic calculus starts are never given to a single mind. The peculiar character of the problem of a rational economic order is determined precisely by the fact that the knowledge of the circumstances which we must use never exists in concentrated or integrated form, but solely as the dispersed bits of incomplete and frequently contradictory knowledge which separate individuals possess. The economic problem of society is thus not merely a problem of how to allocate given resources, if given is taken to mean given to a single mind which deliberately solves the problem set by these data. It is rather a problem of how to secure the best use of resources known to any of the members of society for ends whose relative importance only these individuals know. Or, to put it briefly, it is a problem of the utilization of knowledge which is not given to anyone in its totality. This character of the fundamental problem has, I am afraid, been obscured rather than illuminated by many of the recent refinements of economic theory, particularly by many of the uses made of mathematics. Though the problem with which I want primarily to deal in this paper is the problem of a rational economic organization, I shall be led again and again to point to its close connections with certain methodological questions. Many of the points I wish to make are indeed conclusions toward which diverse paths of reasoning have unexpectedly converged. But as I now see these problems, this is no accident. In ordinary language, we describe by the word planning the complex of interrelated decisions about the allocation of our available resources. All economic activity is in this sense planning, and in any society in which many people collaborate, this planning, whoever does it, will in some measure have to be based on knowledge which, in the first instance, is not given to the planner but to somebody else, yet somehow will have to be conveyed to the planner. The various ways in which this knowledge on which people base their plans is communicated to them is the crucial problem for any theory explaining the economic process, and the problem of what is the best way of utilizing knowledge initially dispersed among all the people is at least one of the main problems of economic policy, or of designing an efficient economic system? The answer to this question is closely connected with that other question which arises here, that of who is to do the planning. It is about this question that all the dispute about economic planning centers. This is not a dispute about whether planning is to be done or not. It is a dispute as to whether planning is to be done centrally by one authority for the whole economic system, or is to be divided among many individuals. Planning, in the specific sense in which the term is used in contemporary controversy, necessarily means central planning, direction of the whole economic system according to one unified plan. Competition, on the other hand, means decentralized planning by many separate persons. The halfway house between the two, about which many people talk but which few like when they see it, is the delegation of planning to privileged industries, or, in other words, monopolies. Which of these systems is likely to be more efficient depends mainly on the question, under which of them can we expect that fuller use will be made of the existing knowledge. This, in turn, depends on whether we are more likely to succeed in putting at the disposal of a single central authority all the knowledge which ought to be used, but which is initially dispersed among many different individuals, or in conveying to the individuals such additional knowledge as they need in order to enable them to dovetail their plans with those of others. End of Section 2. Read by Mary T., San Diego, California, March 5th, 2024.
Section 3 of the Use of Knowledge in Society. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Ted Leinhart. The Use of Knowledge in Society by Friedrich Hayek. Uncommon knowledge. It will at once be evident that on this point the position will be different with respect to different kinds of knowledge. The answer to our question will therefore largely turn on the relative importance of the different kinds of knowledge, those more likely to be at the disposal of particular individuals, and those which we should with greater confidence expect to find in the possession of an authority made up of suitably chosen experts. If it is today so widely assumed that the latter will be in a better position, this is because one kind of knowledge, namely scientific knowledge, occupies now so prominent a place in public imagination that we tend to forget that it is not the only kind that is relevant. It may be admitted that, as far as scientific knowledge is concerned, a body of suitably chosen experts may be in the best position to command all the best knowledge available, though this is, of course, merely shifting the difficulty to the problem of selecting the experts. What I wish to point out is that, even assuming that this problem can be readily solved, it is only a small part of the wider problem. Today, it is almost heresy to suggest that scientific knowledge is not the sum of all knowledge, but a little reflection will show that there is beyond question a body of very important but unorganized knowledge which cannot possibly be called scientific in the sense of knowledge of general rules, the knowledge of the particular circumstances of time and place. It is with respect to this that practically every individual has some advantage over all others because he possesses unique information of which beneficial use might be made only if the decisions depending on it are left to him or are made with his active cooperation. We need only to remember how much we have to learn in any occupation after we have completed our theoretical training, how big a part of our working life we spend learning particular jobs, and how valuable an asset in all walks of life is knowledge of people, of local conditions, and of special circumstances. To know of and put to use a machine not fully employed, or somebody's skill which could be better utilized, or to be aware of a surplus stock which can be drawn upon during an interruption of supplies, is socially quite as useful as the knowledge of better alternative techniques. The shipper who earns his living from using otherwise empty or half-filled journeys of tramp steamers, or the estate agent whose whole knowledge is almost exclusively one of temporary opportunities, or the arbitreur who gains from local differences of commodity prices, all are performing eminently useful functions based on special knowledge of circumstances of the fleeting moment not known to others. It is a curious fact that this sort of knowledge should today be generally regarded with a kind of contempt, that anyone who, by such knowledge, gains an advantage over somebody better equipped with theoretical or technical knowledge is thought to have acted almost disreputably. To gain an advantage from better knowledge of facilities of communication or transport is sometimes regarded as almost dishonest, although it is quite as important that society make use of the best opportunities in this respect as in using the latest scientific discoveries. This prejudice has, in a considerable measure, affected the attitude toward commerce in general compared with that toward production. Even economists who regard themselves as immune to the crude materialist fallacies of the past constantly commit the same mistake where activities directed toward the acquisition of such practical knowledge are concerned, apparently because in their scheme of things all such knowledge is supposed to be given. The common idea now seems to be that all such knowledge should, as a matter of course, be readily at the command of everybody, and the reproach of irrationality leveled against the existing economic order is frequently based on the fact that it is not so available. This view disregards the fact that the method by which such knowledge can be made as widely available as possible is precisely the problem to which we have to find an answer. End of section 3.
Section 4 of the Use of Knowledge in Society. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Use of Knowledge in Society by Friedrich Hayek. The Planner's Dilemma. If it is fashionable today to minimize the importance of the knowledge of the particular circumstances of time and place, this is closely connected with the smaller importance which is now attached to change as such. Indeed, there are few points on which the assumptions made, usually only implicitly, by the planners differ from those of their opponents as much as with regard to the significance and frequency of changes, which will make substantial alteration of production plans necessary. Of course, if detailed economic plans could be laid down for fairly long periods in advance and then closely adhered to so that no further economic decisions of importance would be required, the task of drawing up a comprehensive plan governing all economic activity would be much less formidable. It is, perhaps, worth stressing that economic problems arise always and only in consequence of change. As long as things continue as before, or at least as they were expected to, there arise no new problems requiring a decision, no need to form a new plan. The belief that changes, or at least day-to-day adjustments, have become less important in modern times implies the contention that economic problems also have become less important. This belief in the decreasing importance of change is, for that reason, usually held by the same people who argue that the importance of economic considerations has been driven into the background by the growing importance of technological knowledge. Is it true that, with the elaborate apparatus of modern production, economic decisions are required only at long intervals, as when a new factory is to be erected or a new process to be introduced? Is it true that, once a plant has been built, the rest is all more or less mechanical, determined by the character of the plant, and leaving little to be changed in adapting to the ever-changing circumstances of the moment? The fairly widespread belief in the affirmative is not, as far as I can ascertain, borne out by the practical experience of the businessman. In a competitive industry at any rate, and such an industry alone can serve as a test, the task of keeping costs from rising requires constant struggle, absorbing a great part of the energy of the manager. How easy it is for an inefficient manager to dissipate the differentials on which profitability rests. A great variety in costs of production, even when using the same technical facilities, is commonplace in business experience, but does not seem to be equally familiar to many economists. The very strength of the desire, constantly voiced by producers and engineers, to be allowed to proceed untrammeled by considerations of money costs, is eloquent testimony to the extent to which these factors enter into their daily work. One reason why economists are increasingly apt to forget about the constant small changes which make up the whole economic picture is probably their growing preoccupation with statistical aggregates, which show a very much greater stability than the movements of the detail. The comparative stability of the aggregates cannot, however, be accounted for, as the statisticians occasionally seem to be inclined to do, by the law of large numbers, or the mutual compensation of random changes. The number of elements with which we have to deal is not large enough for such accidental forces to produce stability. The continuous flow of goods and services is maintained by constant deliberate adjustments, by new dispositions made every day in the light of circumstances not known the day before, by B stepping in at once when A fails to deliver. Even the large and highly mechanized plant keeps going largely because of an environment upon which it can draw for all sorts of unexpected needs: tiles for its roof, stationery or its forms, and all the 1,001 kinds of equipment in which it cannot be self-contained, and which the plans for the operation of the plant require to be readily available in the market. I should also briefly mention the fact that the sort of knowledge with which I have been concerned is knowledge of the kind which by its nature cannot enter into statistics, and therefore cannot be conveyed to any central authority in statistical form. The statistics which such a central authority would have to use would have to be arrived at precisely by abstracting and then lumping together items which differ as regards location, quality, and other particulars in ways that may be very significant for the specific decision. It follows from this that central planning which is based on statistical information cannot, by its nature, take direct account of these circumstances of time and place. The central planner will have to find some way to make decisions by leaving them to be made by the man on the spot. If we can agree that the economic problem of society is mainly one of rapid adaptation to changes in the particular circumstances of time and place, it would seem to follow that the ultimate decisions must be left to the people who are familiar with these circumstances, who know directly of the relevant changes and of the resources immediately available to meet them. We cannot expect that this problem will be solved by first communicating all this knowledge to a central board which, after integrating all knowledge, issues its orders. We must solve it by some form of decentralization. But this answers only part of our problem. We need decentralization because only thus can we ensure that the knowledge of the particular circumstances of time and place will be promptly used. The man on the spot cannot, however, decide solely on the basis of his limited but intimate knowledge of the facts of his immediate surroundings. There still remains the problem of communicating to him such further information as he needs to fit his decisions into the whole pattern of changes of the larger economic system. End of section 4.
Section 5 of The Use of Knowledge in Society. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Anthony J.C. The Use of Knowledge in Society by Friedrich Hayek. Useful individual knowledge. How much knowledge does the individual need in order to make these decisions successfully? Which of the events beyond his own horizon of immediate knowledge are of relevance to his immediate decision, and how much of them need he know? There is hardly anything that happens anywhere in the world that might not have an effect on the decision he ought to make, but he need not know of these events as such, nor of all their effects. It does not matter for him why more screws of one size than of another are wanted at the particular moment, why paper bags are more readily available than canvas bags, or why skilled labour or particular machine tools have for the moment become more difficult to obtain. All that is significant for him is how much more or less difficult to procure they have become compared with other things with which he is also concerned, or how much more or less urgently wanted are the alternative things he produces or uses. It is always a question of the relative importance of the particular things with which he is concerned, and the causes which alter their relative importance are of no interest to him beyond the effect on those concrete things of his own environment. It is in this connection that what I have called the economic calculus, or the pure logic of choice, helps us, at least by analogy, to see how this problem can be solved and is being solved by the price system. Even the single controlling mind, in possession of all the data for some small and self-contained economic system, would not, every time some small adjustment in the allocation of resources had to be made, go explicitly through all the relations between ends and means which might possibly be affected. It is indeed the great contribution of the pure logic of choice to have demonstrated conclusively that even such a single mind could solve this kind of problem only by constructing and constantly using rates of equivalence, or values, or marginal rates of substitution. That is, he would have to attach to each kind of scarce resource a numerical index which cannot be derived from any property possessed by that particular thing, but which reflects or in which is condensed its significance in view of the whole means-end structure. In any small change he will have to consider only these quantitative indices or values, in which all the relevant information is concentrated, and by adjusting the quantities one by one, he can appropriately rearrange his dispositions without having to solve the whole puzzle ab initio, or without needing at any stage to survey it at once in all its ramifications. Fundamentally, in a system in which the knowledge of the relevant facts is dispersed among many people, prices can act to coordinate the separate actions of different people in the same way as subjective values help the individual to coordinate the parts of his plan. End of section 5. Read by Anthony J.C., Charlotte, April 25th, 2024.
Section 6 of the Use of Knowledge in Society. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Ted Leinhart. The Use of Knowledge in Society by Friedrich Hayek. Miracle of the Price System. It is worth contemplating for a moment a very simple and commonplace instance of the action of the price system to see what precisely it accomplishes. Assume that somewhere in the world a new opportunity for the use of some raw material, say tin, has arisen, or that one of the sources of supply of tin has been eliminated. It does not matter for our purpose, and it is significant that it does not matter which of these two causes has made tin more scarce. All that the users of tin need to know is that some of the tin they used to consume is now more profitably employed elsewhere, and that, in consequence, they must economize tin. There is no need for the great majority of them even to know where the more urgent need has arisen, or in favor of what other needs they ought to husband the supply. If only some of them know directly of the new demand and switch resources over to it, and if the people who are aware of the new gap thus created in turn fill it from still other sources, the effect will rapidly spread throughout the whole economic system. This influences not only all the uses of tin, but also those of its substitutes and the substitutes of these substitutes, the supply of all things made of tin and their substitutes, and so on. All this takes place without the great majority of those instrumental in bringing about these substitutions knowing anything at all about the original cause of these changes. The whole acts as one market, not because any of its members surveys the whole field, but because their limited individual fields of vision sufficiently overlap so that through many intermediaries the relevant information is communicated to all. The mere fact that there is one price for any commodity, or rather that local prices are connected in a manner determined by the cost of transport, etc., brings about the solution which, if conceptually possible, might have been arrived at by one single mind possessing all the information which is in fact dispersed among all the people involved in the process. We must look at the price system as such a mechanism for communicating information if we want to understand its real function, a function which it fulfills less perfectly as prices grow more rigid. Even when quoted prices have become quite rigid, however, the forces which would operate through changes in price still operate to a considerable extent through changes in the other terms of the contract. The most significant fact about this system is the economy of knowledge with which it operates, or how little the individual participants need to know in order to be able to take the right action. In abbreviated form, by a kind of symbol, only the most essential information is passed on, and this is passed on only to those concerned. It is more than a metaphor to describe the price system as a kind of machinery for registering change, or a system of telecommunications which enables individual producers to watch merely the movement of a few pointers, as an engineer might watch the hands of a few dials, in order to adjust their activities to changes of which they may never know more than their reflection in the price movement. Of course, these adjustments are probably never perfect in the sense in which the economist conceives of them in his equilibrium analysis. But I fear that our theoretical habits of approaching the problem with the assumption of more or less perfect knowledge on the part of almost everyone has made us somewhat blind to the true function of the price mechanism and led us to apply rather misleading standards in judging its efficiency. The marvel is that in a case like that of a scarcity of one raw material, without an order being issued, without more than perhaps a handful of people knowing the cause, tens of thousands of people whose identity could not be ascertained by months of investigation are made to use the material or its products more sparingly. That is, they move in the right direction. This is enough of a marvel, even if, in a constantly changing world, not all will react so perfectly that their profit rates will always be maintained at the same normal level. I have deliberately used the word marvel to shock the reader out of the complacency with which we often take the working of the price mechanism for granted. I am convinced that if it were the result of deliberate human design, and if the people guided by the price changes understood that their decisions have significance far beyond their immediate aim, this mechanism would have been acclaimed as one of the greatest triumphs of the human mind. Its misfortune is the double one, that it is not the product of human design, and that the people guided by it usually do not know why they are made to do what they do. But those who clamor for conscious direction, and who cannot believe that anything which has evolved without design, and even without our understanding it, can solve problems which we cannot solve consciously, should remember this. The problem is precisely how to extend our utilization of resources beyond the span of the control of any one mind, and therefore how to dispense with the need of conscious control, how to provide inducements which will make the individuals do the desirable things without anyone having to tell them what to do. The problem which we meet here is by no means peculiar to economics, but arises in connection with nearly all truly social phenomena, including language and most of our cultural inheritance, and constitutes really the central theoretical problem of all social science. As Alfred Whitehead has said in another connection, it is a profoundly erroneous truism repeated by all copybooks and by eminent people when they are making speeches, that we should cultivate the habit of thinking what we are doing. The precise opposite is the case. Civilization advances by extending the number of important operations which we can perform without thinking about them. This is of profound significance in the social field. We make constant use of formulas, symbols, and rules whose meaning we do not understand, and through the use of which we avail ourselves of the assistance of knowledge which individually we do not possess. We have developed these practices by building upon habits and institutions which have proved successful in their own sphere, and which have in turn become the foundation of the civilization we have built up. The price system is just one of those formations which man has learned to use, though he is still very far from having learned to make the best use of it, after he had stumbled upon it without understanding it. Through it, not only a division of labor, but also a coordinated utilization of resources based on a similarly divided knowledge has become possible. The people who like to deride any suggestion that this may be so usually distort the argument by insinuating that it asserts that by some miracle just that sort of system has spontaneously grown up, which is best suited to modern civilization. It is the other way round. Man has been able to develop that division of labor on which our civilization is based because he happened to stumble upon a method which made it possible. Had he not done so, he might still have developed some other, altogether different type of civilization, something like the state of the termite ants, or some other altogether unimaginable type. All that we can say is that nobody has yet succeeded in designing an alternative system in which certain features of the existing one can be preserved, which are dear even to those who most violently assail it, such as particularly the extent to which the individual can choose his pursuits and consequently freely use his own knowledge and skill. It is in many ways fortunate that the dispute about the indispensability of the price system for any rational calculation in a complex society is now no longer conducted entirely between camps holding different political views. The thesis that without the price system we could not preserve a society based on such extensive division of labor as ours was greeted with a howl of derision when it was first advanced by von Mises in the early 1920s. Today, the difficulties which some still find in accepting it are no longer mainly political, and this makes for an atmosphere much more conducive to reasonable discussion. When we find Leon Trotsky arguing that economic accounting is unthinkable without market relations, when Professor Oskar Lange promises Professor von Mises a statue in the marble halls of the future Central Planning Board, and when Professor Abba P. Lerner rediscovers Adam Smith and emphasizes that the essential utility of the price system consists in inducing the individual, while seeking his own interest, to do what is in the general interest, the differences can indeed no longer be ascribed to political prejudice. The remaining dissent seems clearly to be due to purely intellectual and more particularly methodological differences. End of section 6.